Hi, Mr. Obehi. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about my work. And the first thing I'm going to say in your introduction, you said Aliou is associate professor at Tennessee State University. I'm not at Tennessee State University. I'm at Middle Tennessee State University.
Oh, okay,
Because,
okay.
yes, you have another university that is called Tennessee State University. I'm not there, but I'm at Middle Tennessee State University that is located in Murfreesboro, in the city of Murfreesboro, something like 25 minutes south of Nashville in the state of Tennessee. Now, you asked me to talk about myself. I myself, I'm from Senegal, located in West Africa, and I teach here in the United States. It's a long procedure, but first, why I decided to do history. The reason is growing up in Senegal as somebody who, yes, was born after the independence, but I used to hear my older brothers and my old sisters talking about the kind of like history lessons they were getting in Senegal under the French colonization. One of the main things they were taught was Senegalese people were descendants of the French Gaul people, meaning the people in Senegal were taught that their origin and their ancestors are white people who are part of the ancient French Gaul political system. But also over time growing up with my parents and my family, being a Muslim family, I was told also the origin of my family was from Middle East as something that I'm a Fulani or Harpular, we call it Aliou Ly. And my parents, my dad has always made me believe that the origin of our family is Middle East, specifically Saudi Arabia. You see, and over time, going my education courses in Senegal, I come across the teaching of Professor Cheikh Anta Diop, who is known as one of the most prominent African scholars who talk about Africa and Africanity and the origin of Egyptian civilization to be Black, but also the origin of the humanization also coming out of Africa. Then it's kind of like growing up, I have these three version or theories about what is or what could be my origin. You see, that's where automatically my interest in history start growing up. And I say it might be good to go and teach and find out really what is my origin and where I come from. That's how I became more and more interested in history. And that's also how the whole thing started. Now, talking about why the goal to teach history in the United States and not in Africa and all that, I think it's easily understandable. The young African man who was part of the world that is completely and strongly influenced by the United States. I wanted to come to the United States, and at the same time, the goal was to teach African history in American universities, to participate in breaking down these misconceptions Americans or Westerners might have about Africa. You see, that's what led to all these things coming together, me being here today, teaching African history in American university.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aliou. Well, I'm not going to start with a controversy, but I will usually, this question I usually reserve it for later, but I'm going to just put it to you like this, because since we are here, like I told you before, we tune the system on, that this is just a conversation, and this is what we do here. We just converse, we talk to one another as if we're in a coffee bar. You see, I've interviewed a lot of African American and also Africans that have gone to America in the recent time. And one of the questions I usually ask them in relation to African history is, why is it that they don't hear a lot about the gallant history of Africa in America? And of course, it is like in many other places, these things are not taught in school as if they were forbidden. Of course, what you alluded to in your story is also about the same, no? That when you were growing up, you were told that you were actually originated from France, or you were originated from France. They say you originated from the Middle East, which means that they already put you in a confusion there. But what I want to ask you actually right now is how much African history is actually being taught in the United States? I want to start from there.
Okay, that's a very good question. Now, first, talking about the origin. People been told in ancient time their origin was in France, for them, in the French colonies. It was part of the whole quote unquote French civilizing mission, right? Kind of like trying to brainwash Africans, but also my parents saying like origin being Middle East. It's part of like, as we are Muslims, and they somehow was able, in the past, they were taught that the origin of the family was in Middle East because that's kind of like the starting point of the whole Islamic religion and all this kind of stuff, you know? Now, your question, if you can repeat your question, I'm kind of like losing it. I'm sorry here.
No, it's okay. No, the question was how much African history is being taught in the United States?
Yes. Now, the question, how much African history has been taught in the United States? Now, I can say we are at a point of time where most American universities are trying to have at least one Africanist historian, somebody who can teach, right, African history. You see, and if you look, the whole thing started in the 1950s. If you look before the 1950s, the way people think about Africa in the Western world, mostly like, oh, Africa do not have history. Or in many places, it was like these colonial officers who went to Africa and they start writing about Africans and what they think to be Africans. That was really very far from the reality. You see, it's just in the 1950s, now you start seeing a new generation of Western scholars who were saying, Africa, if they want to teach African history in the Western world, it must be an African history that is centered around Africans and Africa, but not teaching Africa through the eyes of colonizers. You see, that's how the whole process started in places like in England. And after that, most of those ones moved to the United States. That's why if you look historically, by the 1970s, you have some American universities such as UCLA or Ann Arbor in Illinois, right? Or Madison in Wisconsin, who start dedicating the teaching of African history. You see, that's how it started. It started very, very slow, but you can say since after 2000, 1990s to 2000, now I'm going to say most of American universities are trying, if they don't have a full department of African history, at least they are trying to have somebody who can teach these African history courses. You see, that's kind of like where we are, and more people are becoming interested to teaching African history, and more American universities are becoming interested in teaching African history. Now, before that, you talk about how people's view of Africa is so negative, or Africans don't want to talk about Africa when they are in the United States. The thing, it go back to colonization and Atlantic slave trade. You see, because most of the Western people, where they get their information about Africa, it's about through the news. You see, and most of the time here, when you ask people what they know about Africa or Africans, it's like wildlife, safari, disease, and all that. Because the Western media have been portraying Africa as one country. When they talk about other countries, they have a tendency to pinpoint a specific geographical location. For example, when they are talking about a war in Europe, they will pinpoint a specific place where the war is happening in Europe. For example, they might say in Bosnia during the ancient time, a couple of years back, or they might talk about, Ukraine, or they might talk about specific places, right? When they talk about Africa, what happening in Africa, they have a tendency to just make a generalization Africa, to the point where in the mind of most of Western youth, Africa is a country, not a continent. You see, and then from there also, where these media pick up those ideas, they pick up those ideas through these old views about Europeans' views about Africa for Atlantic slave purpose. You know, because Europeans wanted to exploit Africans. And if you want to exploit a human being, right, you have to find a way to kind of like take out the human aspect of that person in order for you to feel morally good in what you're going to be doing. You see, that's where the whole idea about Africans being inferior, Africans not being as human beings as Europeans were developed. And after that, the colonization come and continue play that game.